Well, shall I just start? I don't have any kind of introduction.
Hello, this is a podcast about buildings and cities. I'm George Kinchell.
I'm Luke Jones.
And today we're going to talk about one of the contemporary world's most influential architectural practices.
Indeed, we're venturing into the world of the contemporary.
Things that have happened while we're alive. Yes. It's breaking my lifetime rule of the only good architect is a dead architect.
The world of the present day is our location this week.
And they're Swiss as well, which means they're not completely human.
So one of the big architectural events in London this year is the opening of Switch House, a major extension to Tate Modern, the Museum of Contemporary Art on Bankside. Designed by Herzog de Meuron, the architects of the original conversion of the former Bankside power station to create the original museum between 1995 and 2000, it's a very singular, strange sort of urban object, kind of a mountain with its top cut off. These faceted slopes clad in a sort of knitwear textured pseudo brickwork. It's a building of rich, varied qualities and spaces, generous and quite often actually rather delightful, but experiencing it, as we did a couple of weeks ago when we went to visit it, I found myself returning to the question of why does it look like that?
That's one of the key questions. So superficially, there are things about it which fit in completely and are sort of sensible and make sense. And there are things about it which seem peculiar, arbitrary, subversive possibly, and sometimes weird.
So we might put this in a slightly more informed context and ask a set of more specific questions. What's the design process that enables you to produce a building like this? How do you come up with something which looks like that? What's the approach? What, if anything, are the principles? And what are the technologies? But perhaps we should start with the building. George, we visited it together a couple of weeks ago. Can you talk a bit about your first impressions?
So, I'd seen it growing out of a sort of unprepossessing bit of industrial scrub that was behind it, which a lot of people moaned about the removal of, for some time. It was been building for how long, do you think? A few years?
I think about 5 years.
Yeah. 5 years? This is on the classic thing of build it, get it started, and maybe we can raise enough money to get it finished sort of programme. And in that time, it had been through a number of pretty striking transformations. It's concrete underneath. It's a sort of ziggurat folded structure with big strip windows. And it looked very striking going up. And then I hadn't been back. And in the time they did to finish it, it got completely covered in these bricks. So that's the sort of first impression. And we approached it from the back on bicycles, which sort of gives you the sort of slightly untidy bit where they've still got all the electrical infrastructure, and then you come and you see this mountain of cakey, but a really sort of thick, heavy cakey brick. This really sort of deep texture, which is at once slightly aping the building and not like anything else.
The experience of visiting it is like this. You arrive at the back of the building, or in our case we did. There is this sort of new raised square at the back of it, and there's this great big mountainous thing sort of rising up. There's something quite striking about about like encountering a form which is very steeply sloping.
And one strong thing about it is that there is no, it's like a sealed mountain. There's no way in to the thing itself, and that makes it much less immediately buildingy, in the sense of you're not dealing with this sort of things you're familiar with, the things a child draws when you tell them to draw a house. There's no doors, and it feels much more like a huge form. The old building of Bankside is a huge form too, a very different one, and you tuck into the crease between it and the old building.
And then you kind of can pass up through the building. The materiality of the inside is is distinct and is different. It's sort of concrete. There are no bricks on the inside. It's concrete.
Concrete with quite a few different finishes, rough cut, unfinished oak flooring. It's a edited palette from the old Tate. Some things have come and some things have gone, but it's the same, essentially same sorts of languages. Although the concrete has become a lot more fancy and expressive and it's got much more textures. And
what's changed is that it's irregular. It has a kind of irregularity sort of and capriciousness about every aspect of its design, which the previous museum didn't have because it had sort of fitted itself to the quite classical sort of rational disposition of the original building. So
yeah, even at the most obvious level, the old building, there's a big room, and then off to one side of that there's all of the galleries, and there's a staircase that runs from the top to the bottom, and there's a landing that runs in all the levels, and it's pretty similar. I mean, it's perhaps I'm exaggerating slightly. The same principle, obviously, of a staircase that goes up is there, but the staircase shifts on every level. The landing shifts on every level, and the relationship to the rooms off it changes, sometimes completely. Sometimes it's going from circular stair to a different sort of circular stair to a squared off one in a funny shape.
Lots of the moments which are dramatic and interesting are these things which would have been impossible in the sort of building which the previous building was, where you sort of see one landing and then you see like beyond it the ceiling of another one, or you see kind of up through one spiral staircase into some other piece of geometry which is moving in a different direction.
There's a hell of a lot more obvious architecture going on. Yeah. There is a problem with galleries, particularly contemporary art museums, that the building, this is like, the most obvious example of this is the Guggenheim in Bilbao. The building is like 50 times more extrovert than the small amount of art in it. And the old Tate Modern was not like that. Even though it has this amazing architectural space, and then everything off it is sort of well-lit, proportioned white oblongs that you put paintings on the walls of.
Yeah, with some like very, very
and
restrained.
It's
sometimes there's like a window, or sometimes
there's lots of tasteful detailing, and there's lots of little things, and there's lots of things that you look at them and you think this is very highly expressed. Yeah. But the combination of tight budget and very clear rationale made it immensely clear. There is one mega architectural space, and then there are a few manoeuvres around it. The new one is a lot more baroque and fruity and strange.
We did a little bit of on-site recording when we visited, talking about our initial impressions and what the building seemed like to us at the time.
And we haven't listened to it since. It may be rubbish, so you may not hear any of it, in which case you probably also won't hear this.
Obviously the quality of the...
Rustic.
Maybe a bit...
It's rustic, like the brick surface.
So one thing you can do is to say, like, what would this building be like if it was a Zaha building? If it was a Zaha building, it would be like this very, very personal... The justification is kind of personal, even though she's dead, obviously. But, like, they're
almost
lines,
more so.
They're lines from the pen on. Like Gary. Or if it was OMA, there would be, like, the more or less convincing sort of programmatically based analysis or... and kind of polemic coming out of it. Whereas the justification in HDM stuff, especially like in the last 10 years, has become all about process and particularly about design process. You sort of accumulate models until at a certain point the thing becomes justifiable just through what's happened.
This one, though, I think partly is a legacy of it being the first bit being one of their first prominent projects.
Yeah.
And they were forced by various situations at the time to take on, and a lot of the success of the project was taking on the building as it was. I think even the new bit is heavily informed by the things that determined the old project getting on for 20 years ago.
Well, that's like...
And I think the funny thing, there are qualities of it which are, we were sort of saying, the like weird, are they interested in historicity?
Yes.
Yeah. I think the brick thing, which they're going into, I like the Chelsea Stadium images of, like, making that like a ziggurat.
Oh, yeah, that's all brick, isn't it?
It's
the
all,
new Chelsea Stadium.
It's all brick,
yeah.
and it's all brick arches.
Yeah, which is very, very strange. I think that, in one sense, the way that this has ended up with these strange, like, paired... They're actually square bricks. They're kind of like... They're not really brick shapes.
And like they're not behaving like bricks.
No.
They're just stuck on.
But it's like... the problem which they're dealing with, in a way, is the kind of... the problem of London architecture in the 21st century, which is like, what the fuck else can we do with bricks? Because we still have to use bricks. You know?
Yeah.
There's the brick has become such a, like, unavoidable signifier of like seriousness of intent and kind of intention to build lasting quality and a certain sort of like ethical seriousness about the purpose of the building. And
yeah,
like,
we can't. I mean, also there was a solution to a time which was concrete.
Yeah, but
and various things that looked like concrete.
Yeah.
But they are now so associated with their period.
Yeah, there's a funny relationship to history, isn't there? Like, the thing of doing... The form that you see, this sort of strange, like, quite awkward, faceted, cut-off thing, looks like a massing test model in foam, which has sort of deliberately not been finessed towards...
Of which there were a very large number.
Yeah, well, I'm sure...
Of foam massing models, some of which at various stages being melted by the spray that was used on them.
But like, normally you can imagine this being like an early stage or something which would later be kind of finessed towards a sort of normative, you would make it more stepped, or you would make it more symmetrical, or you would make it... There are all kinds of things that you might do.
There's lots of interesting things going on. I mean, the simplicity of the shape is the only thing that just about justifies it. It's complex. It's got several things going on.
Yeah.
But not that much. And it allows the bricks to become that sort of... the bricks of the old building kind of de-brickify. Here they're sort of Leviathan. It feels like, brick is the first institutional building material. You need factories and lots of people to make them. Be that in Mesopotamia or now. And these are...
Well, it's a hell of an undertaking. I love the idea of everyone drilling all the holes for fixing them all together as well, which presumably are all set out on some amazing spreadsheet somewhere.
How did did they come in as panels?
Yeah, I wonder. No, I don't.
Or did they plonk them all in place?
I used to work around the corner from here, and I saw a lot of this kind of day by day, but I was gone by the time the bricks started.
But it must have happened fairly rapidly.
Yeah, it happened right at the end, and it happened quite. Yeah, the bricks went up fast. For a long time, it was this amazing, very sci-fi looking, concrete panelled, kind of tomb-like.
Yeah, the
structure.
Slots
yeah.
became much darker and much more defined when they didn't have glass reflecting the light in them.
Yeah.
They became like these slots into this real sci-fi object.
Yeah.
It's a lot less sci-fi now. I mean, it's still pretty sci-fi.
It's been a bit softened. I mean, what do you think about the pyramid? So the pyramid is a thing which they seem to be doing quite a lot of at the moment.
It's an interesting thing. I mean, one of the consequences, which is a rather banal one, is the middle of it's quite a long way from the edge.
I don't know. I think it more or less works. I mean, part of that is that actually your program, which is this rectangular boxes with art in, don't need that much natural light, although you can introduce it here and there for kind of funsies. I don't feel like too internal.
I mean,
I don't think that was an issue for it. I wonder if there is something going on about, like, I mean, how do you think they locate themselves with regard to history? I don't think they are like Caruso St. John.
who overthink and overtalk history and then sort of squirt out something which occasionally works and sometimes doesn't.
No.
Vis-a-vis history.
But when you see it, I think when you see a pyramid, it tends to be.
Yeah, equally, it's not Norman Foster pyramid. I build pyramids because pyramids signify nothing.
But it's kind of like pyramid as like beginning and end of history, isn't it? I'm reminded of like Blade Runner or.
Yeah.
The pyramid that the entire world lives in that.
Yeah, or the Ministry of Truth.
William Hodgson. Yeah. What I'm wondering about is like how personalised or how how sort of objective-ish do you think they imagine their approach to building is when they're coming up with this kind of stuff?
It's still fairly personal. I don't think it is absolutely.
I don't mean in point of fact. I mean in
their rhetoric,
like how they would construe it. Yeah, in rhetorical terms.
Process and from the beginning material have always been strong, but they've not been the only games in town with them. They're still making decisions that are definitely to do with them, and like expressively so. There are bits about this that you can look and you can tell this is them.
Yeah, well, there are things which they enjoy doing. So you keep pointing out the ribbon windows, which are obviously, it's a very strong thing. The building consciously is doing a lot of the material things. A lot of the details are carried over. We've got the oak flooring and the...
They haven't included everything. They haven't got the boxy... They haven't got the glass boxes.
No, I think they've given up on the glass boxes, which I think is a good thing, because they're
the
one of
weakest
one of the most rubbish bits. I think that the idea which they had... I guess that was a thing which was kicking around in sort of Swiss architecture in the 90s, and which almost immediately started being done really badly, like much worse than they've done it here by pretty much everyone.
This is much more serious, this one.
Yeah.
Than most of their stuff they're doing at the moment. They often now, even when they're dealing with... They're pretty expensive and pretty institutional in their clients. But this feels more serious and more grown up. Looking at the bricks, these are not Louis Kahn bricks, are they?
No.
These are not bricks that say, I want to be an arch. These bricks are like weird brick earth sandwiches that are stuck on with little rubber bolts.
Yeah, they look like sort of Victoria sponges, don't they?
Yeah. It's a completely different... It's not at all about material truth.
Yeah.
It might be about a language of shapes truth, or a different... It is something that's searching for an honesty and a precedent and a logical coherence.
I guess there's the whole question of what they've done the same and what they've done differently. One of the big things which they've done differently is to move, which is like obviously a factor of the overall form of the building, but which is also clearly a deliberate intention, is to move from a model which in the old building is you've got more or less the same thing on each floor. You've got circulation, toilets, gallery space. It's all on this very rational rectangular grid. And in this case, the organising sort of principle is this promenade which kind of winds all the way up through the...
Yeah, the staircase isn't in exactly the same place.
The staircase
it changes as it goes up.
It wanders all over It's kind of a free plan. The staircases wander all around. They're all different kinds of staircases. They're all different kinds of circulation spaces as well. So sometimes you're kind of circling around the edge of the building, sort of around this sort of strange envelope. Sometimes you're like going through...
They've still managed to keep the thing of like quite a low ratio of actual like gallery. There's so much circulation and weird breakout space. If you compare it with like the National Gallery, which is like, entirely, essentially entirely, which is not, or the British Museum or the old school museums, which are all gallery.
They're all gallery, yeah. No, in this case, like the circulation is a very distinct thing, and in a way, it's like the main attraction actually.
Yeah.
The main attraction is going over the bridge at the 4th floor, is winding up and down all these different staircases.
I was a little disappointed with that bridge. It doesn't feel anything like as good as the lower bridge.
Yeah.
It's a bit...
They've made it quite discreet.
Claustrophobic. And...
I imagine there was probably a brief to try and leave the space undisturbed.
Yeah.
The space of this turbine hall. The gallery
it's much more expressed. There's more swag, swagger. It was quite plain in the old one, and its strength...
The old one is like extremely restrained.
As
and actually
described, I mean, the reviews that I can remember at the time were like very, very impressed with its use of the building and its tweaking up of the old building.
I imagine if we were to reread the reviews at the time, the like stock description would have been the Swiss minimalists, Herzog de Meuron, which is obviously...
Which even at the time would have been wrong.
Yeah.
Very wrong.
But which I think is probably how they were viewed. No, the old one, like there was meant to be one really massive showpiece move, which was the staircase, which got fucked up in construction. And so...
It wouldn't have been any better even if it wasn't fucked up.
Yeah, no, I imagine maybe they would have... Maybe it would have a slightly bigger gap around it.
Yeah.
I think that there might be some
but
things
like,
that got changed on site.
No one would have been...
Yeah.
Oh my god, this staircase has got a 400mm gap round it. In the way that people can be like, this is a really dink, swirly, shiny concrete staircase.
I guess what else is there to talk about? Well, I think we should probably talk about, like, industrial.
Yeah, it's funny, the idea that the cultural movement is the adoption of the collapsing buildings of our industrial forefathers.
Yeah.
The natural space for the unreadable sort of object is in an industrial setting which is imbued with a logical meaning of manufacturing and Vulcan fire and the terrific industry of the objects that hold it together. The riveted
and also
column.
like a this atmosphere of like somber authenticity. Of like
made sparse as well.
Yeah.
As industrial settings, they're full of crap. They're full of objects.
Yeah.
The busyness of making things. Whereas, in a way, it becomes the abstracted spirit of making things.
Yeah, they take out all like the broken machines and the girly calendars and things like that.
Yeah. The dusty little shed in the middle where the guy keeps his with the filing cabinet.
Yeah.
And the sort of perspex windows.
All that goes.
The process. And they become temples of, the abstraction. Like the McLaren, the McLaren factory where everything is gleaming and everything is clean.
Yeah.
Where you can't kind of believe they're actually making things in it.
It's important that they're kind of ruins as well.
Yeah. Ruins of Rome. They are now as abstract from us, aren't they? This building was historicist when it was built. I mean, the power station. And also came kind of... It's post, the industrial period in Britain.
I think that maybe we should talk a bit about the original building in the context of the competition. Maybe this is the thing we can do later, but I think part of what's funny is how difficult people found to decide how to relate to it. There's obviously a real discomfort among contemporary architects in the 1990s. Something about, Gilbert Scott's not quite a modernist. But he's not
he's
quite
funny.
Historic
he comes
either.
from this family of historicist architects and church architects in particular.
Yeah.
But he then manages to make it a timeless historicity. Massive, lumbering, strangely institutional, and manages to get the contract.
Yeah.
Really old guard, but grappling with modernity.
Yeah.
And it was very strong. I mean, the chimney is very strong.
Yes.
It's very, it's enormously stronger than the buildings around it. Do you think it'll become beloved?
I think yes.
I think so too.
Yeah. So let's talk about the architects themselves. They're now some of the most famous architects working today. Designers of the 2008 Olympic Stadium in Beijing, the Blavatnik School of Government, which is one of the buildings on this year's Sterling Prize, a new stadium for Chelsea.
Yeah, this is the one I'm interested in.
Yeah, George.
I think they really could push the boat out with that.
Yeah. And really countless museums, offices, and other buildings all over the world.
Since Tate Modern, they have exploded in their fame and success.
At the time they were appointed to the Tate, they were fairly well known in architectural circles, like highly regarded, but really didn't have a sort of mass public media profile at all. They were widely described as a sort of unknown pair of Swiss minimalists at the time of being appointed to the building, a description which was wrong, but was, I think, not totally unjustifiable on the basis both of their design for the first Tate and of like quite a lot of their other prominent work at the time.
And also the fact that not many big buildings by then.
Yeah.
Not very many. I mean, they've been chugging along for quite a while, but nothing mega substantial prior to that. There was a gallery and some odds and sods, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But
yeah. I mean, for me, even allowing for the length of time that they've been working, they started practice in 1978. But even allowing for the length of time they're working, like the degree of evolution and change in their work, I think is a little bit unusual. So I think it's quite kind of interesting to talk about a few of their projects and what
they've been
about that.
like, although they hadn't done very much, they've been through, what do you think, like 4 styles before they even did anything big.
So we could start with the very, very early work. One of the things which is rather nice and rather touching about them is that they have, this is quite unusual for architects, they have all of their projects on their website, including...
That they have ever done.
Yeah, including the very, very early ones, which are just, you know, a refurbishment of someone's flat, like...
One of them is a balcony.
And this is all happening in Basel, the city where I think they were born, and where they practice to this day.
And they're very involved in the city and the place. Although they work all over the world, they're, you know...
It's a funny place. I mean, it's in Switzerland. I think that it has some like distinct qualities which seem at first glance a little bit incompatible. It's like a big city for the arts. They have a big arts festival there, and I think have always had like a big community around contemporary art. And it also is extremely industrial. It's in like the highly industrialized part of Switzerland. A little interesting factoid is that Switzerland has the highest per capita industrial output in the world.
Which, if you go there, is actually blooming obvious.
Yeah.
About 50% of it must be directed to building bridges and tunnels, which is essentially what the country consists of.
But it's the thing which is actually not in the kind of commonly held stereotype of Switzerland at all. It's like a non...
I don't know. It depends who you talk to. I mean, if you know anyone who knows anything about big companies,
yeah,
like, it's not a big country, but it's got a lot of big industrial companies. Like, the culture... I'm getting into trouble here, but the culture is really extreme. They have like work ethic that makes sort of East Asia look really laissez-faire. Everything clocks on and off mechanically. You know, you hear of sort of initiatives to spread the morning coffee break, to divide the company into various different teams, which can then optimize, because otherwise everyone goes to the cafe at the same time and no one can get anything. So you have to break them up into sort of like 7-minute long shifts,
the card race,
and like give everyone like color codes, because like everything is, and they're really good at making stuff.
Yeah,
this is really off tangent, and you can cut it out if you want. But another famous Swiss architect,
Peter
Merkley, has done this primary school and kindergarten in an industrial estate, which it is completely continuous with. Like, the playground is exactly the same concrete as the like loading bay of the factory next to it, and the building is exactly the same. And on one side, on the kindergarten, you look through at the 3-meter tall polished grey concrete, and it says kindergarten in like Helvetica block capitals. And it looks like a nuclear power station. And they go around the other side, and there's the primary school, which is with all its CNC milling machines and like rows of pillar drills to get the next generation of Swiss factory workers up and going. And it's sort of amazing. It's like they've got these workshops that are much more impressive than the one that I certainly worked in as an architecture student in this primary school, which looks like a factory making like steam turbines. And every surface, they're only allowed to have everything in grey, and it's all polished concrete.
We're going to see that these are big constituent, in terms of who the clients are.
Yeah.
Early Herzog de Meuron stuff is like a mixture of art and industry. And
they look the same in Switzerland. The art things have all, like gantry cranes, they are boxes with polished concrete floors. in my experience. Or they are galleries, which are concrete. We're not talking about the one specifically but my experience of going around Switzerland. Lots of concrete oblongs, externally beautiful concrete with perfect fixed glass picture windows, and like this is what it's the same. Everything's the same. It's all like massively over-engineered. Art and industry have like the same language, except the art is like the industry but over-engineered more.
Should we talk about the really early projects?
Yeah, I think you know way more about a general point. I think Luke knows way more about these people than I do.
So we could talk about the really early ones. There are two early famous projects. One is the Blue House, and one is something called a House for an Art Collector. What's interesting at this very early point is that they are definitely still under the influence of the sort of currents in kind of postmodern architecture that was going on at the time. And
yeah, I think I would say in contact with Italian, the sort of what they called like the new student movement or whatever it's called, which was new in like 1960.
So there's a strong like Aldo Rossi flavour to.
It's never as monumental and fruity as Rossi. Yeah, it's always Rossi goes in all the way, and has the buildings are slightly saturnine. They're monumental and saturnine and De Chirico-esque, or surrealist in a way that their building was jokey.
They're very interested in the image of the house in these projects. I mean, shall I describe them quickly? So the Blue House is it's like a 2-story breeze block building painted bright Yves Klein blue with a sort of expressed like pitched roof with eaves basically and a single big expressed circular window.
Yeah, which was one of their early calling cards.
Yeah.
Lots of their buildings had round windows for a bit.
The House for the Art Collector is another housey pitched roof form. In this case, it's got this sort of interesting mixture of precast concrete and pine elements. And the house is sort of feels like it's kind of floating above this big cast concrete courtyard, basically. Yeah. So
in both cases, I would say there's a common thing, which is that they have taken symbols of housiness.
Yeah.
They're all there, and they're all subverted, exaggerated, shifted, materially changed, but present, which is a very postmodern thing to do.
That sort of stuff is really... It's certainly gone by the late 80s when they are starting to achieve some profile, and the projects for which they would have been famous at the time of the first Tate competition are in the early 90s, and there are two. One is the Ricola storage building, which is for a company who I'm aware of as making like herbal flavoured chewing gum. Is that Ricola?
Don't know.
Yeah.
Don't know, never put the two together, to be honest. Quite possibly.
Which is, it's like it's a storage shed, but it has this...
This is the sort of thing they did. The other one is even more ridiculous. This is moderately ridiculous.
It's a storage shed, but it has this facade which is polycarbonate, so like clear, thick...
translucent plastic.
Yeah, which has a screen-printed photos of old Victorian kind of vegetable photos on them.
Slightly sinister.
And it's backlit. So the famous photos of it are all at dusk or at night, and it has this rather amazing sort of magic lantern effect.
Yeah, witching hour. This is a trick that's general to polycarbonate buildings. Yeah. You have buildings where the entire facade is polycarbonate. You get this sort of ghost of the inside, but here the ghost is really obviously the photograph.
Really these applied images.
Yeah.
The other one, the signal box, it's like it appears as this sort of single material. It's entirely wrapped in this copper ribbon. It's like a kind of sort of slightly skewed kind of cuboidal thing, which has been entirely wrapped in a copper ribbon, except for at the windows where the ribbon has been bent on its axis, so that instead of wrapping the building, it's kind of
twisted. I remember it's being twisted, but I may have lied.
Oh yeah, it's twisted
myself. Like it goes through one like half rotation, which makes
so that instead of looking through like a solid wall of copper, you're looking through this like thin grill of horizontal grille of
which shifts because it's just that half turn is the whole thing.
the
This really set people alight.
yeah.
That one was particularly, actually no, both of them were really prominent.
I think in both cases they're doing something with materials which architects found very exciting. I think that the Ricola thing arrived at a time when that sort of expanded polycarbonate was relatively new.
Yeah.
And
It was still pretty cool in like 2006 when other people were trying to do it.
Yeah. And I mean, I think this is a thing that you see quite a lot with Swiss architects, actually, that they get the new materials first, and it's probably because they're made there.
Because the expensive posh version of it will be made just down the valley.
Yeah.
And everyone else gets it when like it hits Shenzhen. Probably each panel of their polycarbonate was like 60 quid or something, whereas now it's about 3.
Yeah. So I think that when these things were like lighting up architectural mags in the early 90s, I think that's a lot of what people were excited in.
I can remember being taught in foundation right at the beginning that this was the best thing ever.
The signal box.
The signal box, was probably the best thing ever, and some of the other, and they were probably the coolest practice operating in 2004.
I think that the signal box is interesting and probably like more successful. What it does is like
it's really where it's successful is it's incredibly the narrative of it is this is a building which has got one function which is looking out of. It is a box that you look out of, and it has one material which is a hyper-materially material, copper.
Yeah.
Which has a couple of properties which are used to make it transparent.
But it unifies those with really strong metaphoric identity as well.
Yeah.
Which is that it's essentially made like an electromagnet or a guitar pickup or something. It's like a
and
wound.
It sits, and it photographs incredibly well. It sits in this, that really like you're leaving the station, and a certain sort of person like me, and there's all these cables moving up and down, and all these weird, like crappy plants and chippings, and funny, ambiguous boxes for various bits of electrical equipment and signalling and stuff. It sits in that landscape as this glowing little gem. But it is just a like over-articulated and incredibly expensive box as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, sure.
Both of them also bear, and I think this starts to bear on like where are the ideas coming from, what is informing the approach, and both of these have like strong influence from 20th century art or like sort of contemporary late 20th century art, basically. In the case of the signal box, I mean, they've talked about the influence of Joseph Beuys, who was an artist who had this very specific set of materials which had like these incredibly strong sort of symbolic and metaphoric meanings. So in his case, they were like copper, felt, fat, sort of timber to some extent. And the
very materially materials.
Yeah.
Like felt and fat, they're very, very materially things. And I think this is a general theme with them, that they take on ideas, but they're more like senses or feelings, like feeling about material. They couldn't write a long theoretical screed about it, or they occasionally do, but they're not particularly interesting to read compared to the physical manifestations of them. Like the idea as you expressed it, I don't think you'd add anything more to it than that. I don't think there is anything more to it than that is meaningful.
I think in the case of like the Ricola storage building, you also, I think that there's a bit of an influence of like people like Gerhard Richter and this like sense of the photograph as this slightly kind of uncanny object, especially in reproduction in different forms.
I mean, not just, this sort of comes from this Benjamin, there's like all these other people, but this sense of like ghosted, creepy time. But also the thing with Gerhard Richter, I think, is rather again than the sort of deep theory, and I think he's a very thinking artist.
It's very visual.
It's just the immediate, he has got these greasy. I mean, his paintings are creepy because they're of like his uncle Nazis and like blown up cities and people being gassed and stuff, which is Baader-Meinhof. Though it doesn't take a lot to make those creepy. The photographs on the outside of the storage are not of members of Baader-Meinhof, which would have been a very strong decision.
Yeah. Can you imagine that planning meeting? Can't you?
Are you sure about this?
So, they won the first day at competition against a set of what feel like
they were from prominent people, like Rogers did one, didn't he? And
there's definitely an OMA scheme. So
like people who are definitely bigger guns than they are.
Yeah, David Chipperfield, who I think didn't have like a massive profile then, did one. We don't want to say too much about the other competition entries.
They were much worse.
Yeah, the main thing about them is that theirs was an obvious winner because it was like sensible, buildable, and didn't do anything incredibly stupid. More than one of the other competition entries proposed knocking down the chimney.
Yeah. The number of incredibly stupid things that were proposed, most of the proposals had one or two incredibly...
the Chipperfield proposal, I think, involved knocking down the chimney just because he thought it looked nicer.
Yeah, and making... it's because he wanted it to be like one box with another box that he was going to build. Or like taking the roof off completely and having a glass box in sort of standard Richard Rogers style. I think that was the Rogers one.
I think the OMA one also involved taking the chimney down and then replacing it with a Tatlin style steel.
Anyway, they were very stupid. That accounts for how they can get the project because they put a proposal in that wasn't retarded.
So what's interesting, I think, post Tate. There's like a pre-Tate and a post-Tate Herzog de Meuron in a way. And like post-Tate, the work goes in a whole series of different interesting places.
Also, after then, they expand exponentially.
Yeah.
It just explosively. They get another, like, I don't know when they got the Napa Valley projects.
I think immediately afterwards.
Like immediately afterwards.
While it was on
and
site.
Then it just exploded. It just increased. And they're now huge.
So this is another one of the greatest hits, is this winery in the Napa Valley.
Which again is in the sort of materialist vein. But the material here is different. The material here is gabions, mesh boxes filled with rocks. And again, they take a material and manipulate it. And the manipulation here is... So it's a sort of long oblong. They were in an oblong phase at the time. Tasteful modernist oblong. And here they were just using basically different grades of rocks, which makes the wall less or more permeable. And the story was sort of about ventilating stored wine. But I mean, all that almost was by the by, in that they had this grid that, by the nature of a simple transformation of one material, becomes many things and has languages on what otherwise is a monolithic plane.
But the projects also start to become a lot less monolithic, or to like. Do you want to talk about a couple more? Should we talk about the Larvin?
Yeah, this was again when we were like being educated. This was
so the Larvin Center is probably.
Is it Larvin or Laban?
Larvin.
Larvin.
I think I've definitely been told off by a dancer for saying it wrong, and my memory is it's Larvin.
Yeah.
So the Larvin Center, which is their next big project in London after First Tate, is. Yeah, it's like a child of Tate. It's got the same sort of opaque, boxy
it's got
thing.
The bit in Tate which is least convincing.
Yeah.
And it's a bit more convincing there.
But what's interesting about it is that on the inside, there's all kinds of weird, like tacky stuff that they've decided to have a go at. There's like a very shiny spiral staircase. The floors are asphalt. There are these enormous murals by Michael Craig Martin, which are all like lime, green and pink. There's a kind of a story in that case about it being, it's a building with dancers and it's all about this kind of tactility and touching it with different parts of the body or whatever. But it's completely unrestrained.
There's a general thing with all their projects, which is part of the reason they took a long time to get going. They've never been cheap. They've always been someone who needs surplus to spend on the stuff they're interested in. And putting extra stuff in. And they've always had fat, and they sort of throw stuff out, try stuff out, and that evolves into things. And all their buildings are expensive.
There's something which is interesting is, as you say, that they have like a lot of these different preoccupations and ideas on the go at one time, and they tend to start somewhere and then crop up in a whole series of projects, and then often they will reach a like moment of absurd excess and then drop out.
But also, sometimes they creep along and really change in nature. Yeah. Like I really feel those circular windows that were right at the beginning are a manifestation of an interest in primary shapes, which has gone all over the place, but always been there.
Yeah, which resulted in actually, I think, one of my favourite buildings of theirs, which is the Barcelona Forum, this enormous triangular...
Equilateral triangle.
It's an equilateral triangle.
Sitting on its own. It's like this giant...
It's very strange. I mean, in one way, I think it's got a lot of qualities which would probably horrify a lot of architects, in the sense that it
is gross.
It's gross. It's covered in this sprayed concrete. So this is literally concrete that comes out of a hose at high speed, and you wiggle it around. It's bright Yves Klein blue, so like the Yves Klein blue has reappeared. And it's contrasted with these. It's
got these really on the outside cheesy, awful windows, which are like funny.
Yeah, they've got.
I don't think you think they're as awful as I do.
It's the other element are these very sharp but sort of random angular mirrored windows, and then also it has loads and loads of kind of courtyards which are cut into the volume of it. The whole thing is actually hovering, so it's not only not only a primary equilateral triangle, but it's also hovering on a datum where at one end it's about 5 foot off the ground. And at the other end, it must be, I don't know, like about 8 meters.
It's also big.
Yeah, it's huge. It's a huge thing.
What is it, like 200 meters across?
Yeah, it could be. And so it's got all these different event and concert halls in it. And on the inside, it has all these strange games being played, light and dark materials with these like geometric tessellating tiles, with a lot of mirrors, with these sort of the interiors of the auditoria are very, very dark, and then the spaces between them are bright white. But it's very elemental, and it's very. What I like about it, I've always kind of liked these buildings which know how to do sort of looseness and tightness.
Yeah,
like they know how far to let it hang, or like really push how shit something can be and still be kind of amazing.
That's one thing, they let things hang way more than most people do, considering they're all so crisp and tight.
Yeah. It's interesting that these ideas of theirs have a sort of a half-life, and they have a sort of a story. And so you see something like the sort of screen-printed photos first appearing in a competition entry, I think, for the Jussieu Library in 1990. And then coming through into these like factory buildings, and then it like appears in various other things, and it ends up in this really strange, rather horrible library which they designed in Cottbus, and then it disappears.
Not all their buildings are great; they make mistakes.
But in the same way, we were talking a bit about the designs for their Chelsea stadium are available.
Oh, this looks so strong.
It's so strange,
so mad. Like, I'm sure we're going to mention... Like, the bricks in Tate Modern, right? They're not real bricks. They are a weird shape. They're a weird texture. They look like cake. They're in pairs glued together, and then they're stuck on with little rubber, like, shoes.
Yeah.
This facade. These ones...
So the Chelsea ones.
The Chelsea ones. So the stadium is made of these, like, ribs.
Of brick.
Well, I mean, they're actually of steel.
Yeah.
Like, plastered in massive, oversized bricks.
Yeah, so...
Like, on these incredibly, like, downwards, this ridiculous sort of steel cantilever thing, which is just a rod.
Yeah.
Like it was made out of some implausible Lego shape.
Form follows function, it is not.
No, yeah, completely mad.
So one of the main, obvious things about bricks is that wherever you see them, they're demonstrating a sort of, like, direction of compressive force, aren't they?
You cannot make a stick going out horizontally out of like a single width of bricks.
Because they would fall.
Because bricks don't work like that.
Yeah. We were hypothesizing...
But that is essentially what the Chelsea Stadium is made of.
We were hypothesizing that this may be the last brick building they do, that it feels like it's reaching a sort of fever pitch, after which they'll probably move on to something else.
Oh, I just want another... I mean, it's got all of the... They seem to have done all the brick things with it, because there are also massive brick piers, massive brick walls, brick arches, brick circles... Stuck on bricks, real bricks.
It's going to be completely amazing.
Like bricks in every... Might be.
Yeah.
Never can tell until they pop out.
Yeah.
If they actually do what they're thinking of doing, it'll certainly be interesting.
We've been talking so far about ideas and the way in which particular ideas or fascinations sort of manifest themselves in... And
I would say actually process is one of those ideas. Like, some of the ideas are about literally what buildings are like.
No, I think I want to make a distinction, because I think it's helpful. So we've been talking about ideas in the sense of things which you sort of look to or things which you sort of steer towards. But there is also process, which is how do you go about designing. I mean, you can have a process,
but I think they've changed it lots of times, and it's evolved.
I mean, you
and
can
it's had
have a
themes.
process which is just collecting ideas, which is literally like, I know architects who work like this, where literally it's like, we'll go on like design. Oh, we'll do that.
Yeah,
Like that's a process.
I mean, everyone does it.
It's a shit process.
Yeah, no, but it's one thing you've got to do. Being bits,
Yeah.
you've just got to like put them through. That's a fundamental thing, right? Copying.
But as we've kind of alluded to, there's like quite a lot is known about the way in which they design buildings, and in part this is part of like a distinctively Swiss culture around design process and models, but it also has like very distinctive qualities of its own, which are like distinctive to Herzog and de
It's
Meuron.
worth noting there are lots of sort of semi-famous Swiss architects. I think partly as a factor of the fact that there are loads of really expensive, well-made buildings perpetually being built in Switzerland.
Yeah.
And so there's a really, for the size of the country, a huge, diverse culture of like auteur offices.
Yeah.
And one of the things that in one of the schools is using loads and loads of models, often to sort of, in the case of the sort of, at least the rhetoric of Herzog de Meuron, it's sort of like first ideas about massing, skeleton, sort of evolving through, models that talk about ideas about circulation.
Yeah.
Some of them can be incredibly simple, just sort of bits of paper stuck together and sort of twisted and bashed, and obviously models that are designing models.
Yeah.
Where the way you choose to have something there is you've cut it and you stick it where you feel it should be.
Yeah.
Which is probably one of the drivers of the arbitrary.
Yeah, so I kind of, maybe we can add like a pretentious word to this discussion, which is the concept of the aleatoric, like the process which deliberately incorporates accident, which is something which is definitely, when you're making models by hand.
I'm not sure how accidenty it is. I think it is driven by the material. I mean, I think like the person is thinking very much about where it should go, but he's not measuring it, and it's a bit out of the. It's accidental in the sense that I think it arises a bit out of the property of the materials that he's using to make the model.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Which could be a metaphor for the reality.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we can get into this by looking at some more specific ones. I think one of the things which is distinctive is that there's a lot of model making where the building is just like a thing. It's just like an object.
Yeah.
It's a scaleless thing in search of a kind of distinctive form and material identity. And those two things could work together, or they could be in a weird kind of tension. One of their buildings, which I find very, very strange and fascinating, is the building, the art gallery they did in San Francisco. You seen that one?
Yeah.
Which has this, it's made of copper, sort of perforated. It's got this strange, like, twisting, like, slab tower. The two are related to each other in this uneasy way where it's slightly ambiguous whether the tower thing is coming down and becoming the ground creeping main building, or whether the two are like stuck next to each other. There's no like, they don't really care whether you read it one way or the other, or it has like these very distinctive qualities close up because they've got these like big perforated panels on the outside. So the copper becomes like like going over old ground, like the copper becomes sort of a screen as well as a cladding. It's patinated, so it sort of has these kind of marks of like pseudo age and weathering. And it also has some other ideas which have been floating around in their work, these sort of internal courtyards and things.
Does it work?
It's fine. No, it's quite nice. It's quite interesting. And it's a bit of a landscape, the lower part of the building. You can have these sort of forms which are like very, very sort of self-justifying, and you can see exactly what they are and what they're about. And then you have something like this, which is just like really weird. And if you were just going to sort of draw the ideas which came to you, which were sort of thematically consistent with what you were trying to do, you would never come up with something like this. It has to come out of a process which is a bit open to strangeness.
But also it's not just that that's arbitrary, it's also that they kind of railroad ideas in. They railroad their themes into things. I mean, I was just noticing recently, I was thinking, oh, they've been doing a whole load of other, like, gallery spaces with incredibly thick white walls and weird polished concrete hung things on the ceiling.
Yeah.
In sort of like inverted barrel arches. They've done that like 3 times. It doesn't constitute a house style, because it's in like 1% of their projects. But it's an incredibly, like, it cannot be coincidence that they have done it several times. And there's loads of stuff.
There's this book which I've got called Natural History, which is presentation of, among other, it's got a whole series of essays which I haven't read because they're very boring. It also has lots and lots of pictures of process. It has lots and lots of pictures of models. And they're models, they're the building kind of emerging as this object, as this, like, they do later on in the process start to acquire things like floors, things which give them a sense of immediate scale. But for the majority of what's shown, it's like a scaleless thing.
And also often, not always, but often, like, the shape of it is a bit defined by the way it's been made.
Yeah.
There's often things where, like, it has been made by making several cuts to a solid block, which is a really satisfying way of making models and shapes.
Yeah.
And generates a certain sort of shape.
So do you think that's how the Tate one got its shape?
Yeah, I think it might literally have been hot wire cut foam.
Yeah.
I think that's quite possible. That sort of cut, isn't it? I mean, there's nothing else that you can really get that sort of cut.
Yeah, these sort of simple facets.
But I don't think it's quite... I don't think they completely let themselves be ruled by the model. They will then... They'll have an idea about a shape, they'll make it, they'll then iterate on it.
No, there are obviously stages.
Yeah, and it does feed... And like, sanity and logic is injected early on, I think. I think they're not... just because it's not there in the model doesn't mean it's not going through a filter of, like, introspection a little.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to a design process, I guess there are sort of questions, aren't there? There's, like... We've talked about where do you get your ideas from? How do you like...
God, a loaded question, eh?
Yeah, but
where do you get your ideas
where do you get your ideas from? Which is an idea which people ask, which no one ever wants to answer. The bath. I mean, actually, like, how if you have a brief, like, where do you get you got actually what happens is stuff you've been thinking about already. Anyway. Yeah, stuff you've been thinking about already sort of happens. But there's a process of, like, adding more things to the mix. I think there's another thing which is that in any design process there is a means by which you identify what's at stake, like what are the important drivers in a project. So, I mean, if you were designing, like, a Beaux-Arts building, would say, like, there are rules. Yeah, there are clear rules, and there are rules in terms of the building itself and in terms of the way in which it relates to context.
But even in the, like, most Beaux-Arts things, no one ever actually let that completely drive it.
No. You would, like, move away from
the narrative is completely about this is how we do it, not necessarily actually how it was completely done, which I think is the same with Herzog de Meuron's models. Or
I have a bit of a sort of underlying polemic, which I think is that people are very reluctant to articulate what the rules are about how they design, but that there are rules about there's a sort of hierarchy in approach. What do you do first? And it feels, looking at the buildings, to me, it feels like you have to identify this sort of quite strong, like, material and sort of object-like identity.
There's different ways they make them. I mean, the Blavatnik, which is just sort of finished now, is, like, really obvious. Oh, it's a square with a circle on top of it, with a square on top of it. Yeah. Or something like that. I can't exactly remember what it's like. It's like, where did you get that idea from? Well, I had this square.
Yeah, that's a weird one. It's also, like, it seems to be all about curtains. Maybe I'll just describe, we can drop this in somewhere, but I can describe what a page of this is like, because it's sort of instructive.
Yeah, you better do it, because I haven't really seen the pages.
So you have a page describing the model-making process for the tower of the De Young Museum in California, which is in San Francisco. 3 models at the top made of grey card, which are super simple. You have 2 made of wood, with the sort of cutout from the top. 1 made of wood and rubber bands. Then you have some where there's some cardboard and the floor planes of a kind are starting to appear. Then you have some where they're made of cardboard or wood or also copper mesh, where the floors have sort of disappeared again. Then you have some more ones made of mesh, which is sort of squished and has this like diaphanous, lacy effect. Then you have some where the floor plates have reappeared and there's sort of stairs and things. It looks kind of semi-real. And then there are 6 more iterations, all made of cardboard and mesh in different ways with different sort of angles of tilts and that kind of thing. And that's only an element of the building and presumably is a very edited set of highlights.
They're very strongly part of their rhetoric. Yeah. Have you seen them make animated GIFs of them now? Like going at different speeds. Like each photograph, each image has its own bespoke speed, which is very like its own bespoke period in the animated GIF. Which is very like them.
This is an office which for a long time their rhetoric was that they didn't have a website.
Oh my god. Their website. Yeah, it's unbelievably clunky and overwrought.
It's got like weird sort of pseudo windows.
Architects often like it's like one of these sort of ludicrously I'm nothing by being like the most over-articulated thing imaginable. So, do you want to talk about construction?
Yeah, we can talk about... So there's this other part of process, which is... We've kind of been talking... What we've been talking about is really concept design. So the point in the design before you have to start working out like how it's going to pass fire regulations and all this kind of stuff, where what you're really interested in is like the identity of the building and what it is.
Yeah. And one of the things I'd say that is really strong about them is that they are much more grounded in tectonics in building than they are in theory.
Yeah.
In terms of like written theory.
Yeah.
And one of the things why they keep reusing ideas is because they build up sort of institutional wisdom about how to make them work and also how they work.
The thing about the reusing ideas though is that
they do change each time.
They actually reuse ideas a lot less obviously than like most other like megastar architects, where it's literally the same building. Or in the case of Foster, it's like this incredibly precise set of standard details which are in all of the buildings.
Yeah, it's completely different. I think part of the reason why we say reuse them is because firstly, there's loads of them, and secondly, they mainly get rid of them.
But there's another part of process which is obviously the process of technical design leading to construction.
Yeah.
And the building was built in this rather striking way, which I think both of us were paying quite close attention to. I was working very close by, and so I would sort of go and look at it at lunchtime. And the order in which it was built is like this. They cleared the site and set up the hoarding and everything, and then they cast in situ the lift core. So which is very big in this building. It was sort of rising out of the ground, and that was cast on site.
So far, by the way, completely standard for building a large building. This is exactly how you do it. Like, I bet they had blue letters on the like floors. Like there's this like font, and you use giant blue letters to say which floor it is in case anyone gets mixed up.
Then they started to do something a bit strange, which is that the entire building then arrived sequentially as a whole series of prefabricated parts, which were bolted together on site. Some of them steel, but actually the large majority of them precast concrete.
And some of them must have been big.
They were huge, yeah. They were like lorry-sized pieces. And the whole building went up as this sort of concrete skeleton form, which has like a real science fictional quality. It looks a lot like sort of like Death Star. Like
it was a hell of a lot more striking when it wasn't finished, which is almost always true of buildings. But like the sort of mad surface patination is about turning it down and fading it in.
And then the bricks actually arrived really, really late.
Also, it was a concrete skeleton at complete size for a long time. Like 3 years?
Yeah. The concrete pieces are like quite complex. I think that they integrated, as far as I could tell, they also integrated sort of some of the services. They were literally just being bolted on. And they also, in some cases, looked as if they had parts of the internal finishes or the insulation attached to them. So they were really quite sort of sophisticated.
Far down, like custom prefab chunks.
And all unique, I suspect.
Yeah, I mean, there's not... There are a few things in that building that are the same as each other, but very few.
So I think that it's one of the things which is interesting is that I'm not sure it's really been that long. I think if you were to go back 10 years, I think it would have been a real challenge to make a building like that, simply because of the complexity of the information required to make all of these separate different bits, which actually is worth saying was not done by Herzog de Meuron. This will have been done by the contractor.
I presume so.
Yeah.
I mean, at the stage when they were at that stage, I think there were only half a dozen people in London in charge of it, which would not be enough. Also, like, that work feels crucifyingly dull. Like, I don't care how much, like, software you've got aiding you, it just...
When you walk around, the quality of the detail is pretty good. Normally, as an architect going around a building, you spot a lot of places where people have messed up and they've had to, like, stick on a bit of post hoc drain pipe or something.
It's not completely free of it. It's just amazing to do anything prefabricated where there aren't massive cock-ups everywhere.
Or anything of that kind of scale, actually.
Yeah, but I mean, prefabricating it does, like, times multiply the difficulty, I'd say.
So the technology which has allowed them to do this is BIM.
Building Information Modelling.
So this is us talking about CAD.
I'm well up for talking about CAD.
Yeah.
BIM also is interesting because it's something that is talked about both as a sort of mythical future where buildings will design themselves, and really is about monitoring, like, door handle types.
Yeah. It's about... if you have no knowledge of it at all, it's like a 3D model where the bits of the model have data attached to them, so that the like concrete thing it's identified as being concrete, and you can take that information out.
And the rhetoric is that, like, it will, like, you will feed this into some parametric model, and then there'll be lots of sort of heat maps, and the reality is it's a way of keeping track of large numbers of components and finishes. Yeah,
but this is very clearly a building which would have been impossible in the age of the, like, manually entered Excel spreadsheet.
The construction method is,
I mean,
none of
but like the
nothing about
construction,
the,
like construction